joined here by Aaron Burns, filmmaker, producer, writer, behind brilliant films such as Beyond the Mask, Legacy Peak, Birthright Outlaw, and you've worked on films including War Room and many other Kendrick Brother movies too. Can you first just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became a Christian?
Sure. So I grew up I'm here. We were just talking before we jumped on. I'm here in the Midwest of the U.S. in Michigan, and I grew up with parents who loved me and who taught me the faith. And so it was at an early age that that became real for me as well, and it's something that's grown deeper over the years as I went off to college and on and on. It kind of it's intertwined in some ways with my storytelling journey. I say that my dad told me stories every night, and my mom gave me great books to read. And I think as I grew up, we didn't watch a ton of movies, but would play outside a lot and have a lot of adventures and create and tell stories of my own. I fell in love with the power of storytelling and the power of the stories to communicate truths, and the role of the storyteller in culture is the person who gets to highlight what's important and what matters. So as I saw that, growing up and into my college years, I felt a desire to be a part of the conversation of who gets to tell what stories and highlight those pieces. So kind of intertwined together over the years,
definitely.
for sure.
And from that, how did you get into filmmaking?
So my first feature, well, I'll say when I was a kid, one day my dad made his biggest mistake, which is he let us borrow the chainsaw. We cut out a bunch of trees in this woods behind our house, and we built a log cabin. And then of course we had to make like a pioneer adventure movie, right? Which was a disaster, but just so much fun, telling stories and embodying stories and reading stories and then acting them out and just engaging with storytelling as a craft. We did a feature film when I was in college called Pendragon, where we absolutely butchered one of your origin stories of King Arthur's story. And then that film wound up actually paying back the $80,000 budget that we put into it. Right. But families all over the world were enjoying and saying, we love this. It's a adventure story with heart. Yeah, we can tell you guys are first-time filmmakers, but when are you going to make your next movie? So that was the time where God was kind of working on my heart, and my faith was becoming my own. And that led into the making of a movie called Beyond the Mask. We shot in 2012, released in 2015. And over the years, I've come to have 4 words that kind of describe the stories that I want to tell. So it's timeless, faith, family, adventure. And it's at the intersection of those 4 words are the kind of stories that resonate with me the most deeply.
Yeah, definitely. And some of my questions I was around was, what do you look for when you're trying to find a film to watch?
Yeah, that finding the films to watch can be challenging sometimes. So I now have 5 kids, ranging from ages 10 to 2 months old. And so we try to do family movie night once a week where we all get together and find something that we can watch and enjoy. So both looking for movies that we can watch and then looking for movies to make, those are similar things. Yeah. Those 4 words: timeless, stories that speak to the deep. We were just talking earlier with a friend, myths and the way that God has designed the world to work, and the storytelling narrative of heroes and villains and adventure and our call to adventure, and the natural inclination towards beauty and truth and those things. And then family and adventure. Those are the core 4 words for me as we look for stories we want to tell, stories we want to watch.
Yeah, and I think as well, like when you take a look at streaming services, and there's not many new family-friendly movies that you can just sit down and watch and be like, well, that was a good film to watch and it was family-friendly.
Yes. Yeah, it is interesting that streaming kind of tends to divide farther and farther down to little niches of looking for audiences and things like that. But if you go back to, the golden age of Hollywood, as it were, movies like It's a Wonderful Life,
Hmm.
I sat down and showed that to my kids, and from the 3-year-old to the 10-year-old to my wife and I, we loved it.
Yeah.
And you see the younger kids laughing at the scene where the little kid is going around when her dad is in the midst of the greatest crisis of his life saying, excuse me, I burped, pulling. It's just such a humorous moment that my kids are laughing at as I'm, wiping away tears, pretending not to be so moved by the crisis of life that George Bailey's going through, right? So
Hmm.
just you see some of these amazing storytellers that would have a movie that is timeless and that
Mm.
it connects on all levels for the whole audience.
Brilliant. And talking about that, what do you hope audiences take away from watching your movies?
That is a great question. Uh, One word that I would love for people to take away is hope.
Hmm.
I think our modern world is so devoid of
Mm.
hope, and even if if you make a mistake, when you take God out of things, there's no sense for why you should be here. I feel like so for my faith, it explains my origin, it explains my purpose, it explains my eventual destiny, and it gives me something to do while I'm here. And it gives me hope for the small details of my life, and it gives me hope for the big picture. And it also gives me hope when I've messed things up,
Hmm.
because there's a chance for redemption for even for me. And I think as you watch my films, that's one of the threads, that idea of there's hope for redemption for you, there's hope for a purpose for you, there's hope for a life beyond the one you have here, that travels through all the films. A theme that I love is fatherhood. That's something
Hmm.
that it flows through a lot of the films and the stories that I'm drawn to as well. The power of a father and the difference he
Mm.
can make in your life. And I think as I had a great dad who passed away a number of years ago. And I think about that a lot. And then I think about my kids, how I can inspire them and invest in them. And so those are some themes and thoughts that will often um,
Definitely.
come through. But also, just a big one is this sense of adventure
Hmm.
that I want when I watch a movie. I want to be taken to a faraway place in an adventurous
Yeah.
time, and go on a journey, go on that hero's journey with a character. So I love movies that do that. But then in that hero's journey, you find yourself in the story as well. So that those
Yeah.
those human connection points in the scope of a grand adventure is what we aspire to.
Definitely. And out of all your films, can you pick a favorite scene?
Oh, Richard, that is a cruel question. That's like asking which of your kids is your favorite kid.
Exactly.
That's not fair. I'll tell you from my most recent film I directed
Yeah.
is Birthright Outlaw,
Hmm.
and there is a scene, um, 2/3 of the way through the movie, say, where the character played by Sarah Drew is having a conversation with her on-screen daughter, Olivia Sarabia, and she's sharing her heart with her daughter. And the um, in the film, well, if I'm not careful, I'm going to spoil the whole movie. But she's sharing. The daughter's name is Hope, and she tells
Yeah.
her the story of how she got that name. And I think that is one of my favorite scenes, just for the heart and the
Yeah.
beauty of what that scene means to me.
Fantastic. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, your Birthright Outlaw is your most recent one. It's just come out over here. We're on digital, so people can go and watch that now over here, as well as your other movies as well. They're out over on digital over here too. Now you've got a few new things coming up, and one of those is a
Hmm.
book. Do you want to tell us a
That's
bit
right.
about that?
Sure. So a number of years ago, I stumbled across the writings of Saint Patrick, who, of course, it's March now, and we're trekking towards the annual Saint Patrick's Day celebration. And as Americans, we often are, so you're American. Well, what is your ethnicity beyond just American?
Yeah.
Because our country's only been around for a couple hundred years.
Hmm.
So I will claim, oh yeah, I'm Irish, American. My Irish friends will laugh at me and say, no, you're not. You have nothing to do with us. Um, but growing up, you'll wear a green T-shirt and eat
Yeah.
corned beef, which you find out nobody in Ireland actually eats corned beef. But you kind of celebrate St. Patrick's Day. I had no idea if he was any more real than Robin Hood, right?
Hmm.
But with when you read his letters, that all historians agree, yeah, he wrote these. He's a
Yeah.
real historical character. I was so moved and inspired by the life that he led and the similarities to, if you met him today, how deeply he would speak and resonate with our culture.
Hmm.
So it was excited to just love that story and excited to share it in a book form with a good friend of mine, Matt Michaelatis,
Hmm.
who I actually wrote the screenplay for A Legacy Peak with me.
Hmm.
So we wrote this book together to share some of the prayers and the life and the inspiration of what the whole world celebrates on March 17th, but sometimes not knowing too much about what actually was going on.
Mm. And so this is a book about his prayers as well. So how has this changed your prayer life?
So it's interesting when you think of a hero of the faith, a Paul or a Peter or a Patrick, and just mind if I real quick just let folks know who might not his a quick bio of Patrick,
Yeah.
just a glimpse of the story. So he's actually British. He probably grew up a lot closer to where you're at than
Yeah.
actually in Ireland. And as a kid, was his dad was a deacon, his grandpa's a pastor, and all the religious stuff. He's like, yeah, I'm not interested in that until he gets kidnapped by Irish pirates, and he spends 7 years as a slave in Ireland, tending the sheep, living out there and suffering the cold and all of those things you can imagine what life was like. And in that moment, in that environment, the things his father had taught him and his faith became real for him. He winds up escaping and getting back to Britain. And then God says, I want you to share the love and forgiveness that you've received and go back to the people who enslaved you. And, over the course of the rest of his still very troubled life, the adventures and the challenges that it was to go back to the people who enslaved him, he winds up sharing God's love with those people, and he sees the human trafficking he's a victim of erased, and he sees, human sacrifice wiped out. And scholars call it, or historians call it, the golden age of saints and scholars. That this next 300 years that comes out of the life of this man. So watching this, you say, this guy's so incredible. He's a tier above what any of us could hope or dream to be. But as you dig into the details of his life, he gives you the exact opposite picture. He introduces himself as, I'm Patrick, the unlearned sinner from Ireland. He says, I can barely read Latin. I can barely write it. I'm not all flowery like all y'all are, who are great writers. And I was afraid to write this down, but I just felt like I had to. So he immediately welcomes you and connects with me as the regular old, broken, messed up guy. And you see as he walks through his life and how he prays and how he has faith in God, it's the same God, it's the same faith, it's the same
Hmm.
truth that God was using him. And that gives me great inspiration for my own failures, my own weaknesses and brokennesses, that God can use me. So it was
Yeah.
so many moments that we took from his life as we structured the book, and things that he prayed for, things that are happening to him. We told both the story of his life going through the book,
Hmm.
and then prayers of how it can relate to us today.
Brilliant. And through that as well, how do you hope this will help others, or God will use this book to help others?
So I hope that two thoughts. One, when we hit St. Patrick's Day, use this as an opportunity to share God's love with someone around you. Say, hey, do you
Hmm.
know I know you're wearing green. Have you ever heard the story of St. Patrick? Do you know why we're celebrating him? What a neat opportunity to have a conversation with someone and share God's love with them. And then the other is to think about yourself and think about that question that Patrick asked. How can I serve God? How can I serve my fellow humans? Where is my Ireland? What is God calling me to do? So that's the questions that I
Brilliant.
hope people will be challenged to ask themselves as they read.
Yeah, brilliant. And that sounds like a great film for you guys to make, maybe one day.
It would be so. It's a great story. It is a truly wonderful
It
story.
is
It would be a really great project to make. Yeah.
great. And in terms of films, you've got a new film coming up, and you
hmm
spoke earlier about It's a Wonderful Life, and your film is based on the life story of Jimmy Stewart.
That's right. Yeah. So just over the last number of years, of course, everyone has heard of the movie "It's a Wonderful Life," the story of George Bailey, and played by Jimmy Stewart. But I had no idea the level of the backstory of the kind of man of character that Jimmy Stewart was, and his own journey behind the scenes. So he won the Oscar, and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and Philadelphia Stories at the top of the world in the late 1930s. But then he enlists in the U.S. Army Air Corps and goes and volunteers to come over and fight against the Nazis in World War II.
Hmm.
And spent a number of years stationed out of the UK there, flying these daylight precision bombing runs. And you know, like a lot of celebrities that fought in World War II didn't really go to the front lines. It was just kind of like in name only, and they were entertainers or working on war films or things. But Jimmy said, "No, I want to serve my country. I'm a patriot." So he comes home from the war, broken, and with what we now would consider a PTSD after leading
Mm.
thousands of men, hundreds of planes, and he's called a squadron commander. And then was the guy who's writing letters home, dear Mrs. Whoever, I'm sorry to say your son was killed. And so he is leading these men, planning the missions, absorbing all of this into himself, and he comes home, a broken man. And Hollywood had moved on. Now he's, balding. He's got gray hair. He's hard of hearing in one ear. He's not the dashing leading man he was just a few years before. So MGM cancels his or doesn't renew his contract, and said, "We've got
Mhm.
one project for you. You can play Jimmy Stewart, the bomber pilot, in a movie called Jimmy's War." He says, "I can't do that. Sorry." Then his old friend Frank Capra calls, with whom he did Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and said, "Jimmy, I've got a project for us. It's a Christmas movie about a suicidal father and an angel." He's like, yeah, maybe not that one either, Frank. But then, of course, he goes on to make It's a Wonderful Life.
Mhm.
And in the process of making that movie, Jimmy would write that he found it was his own spiritual healing. And as
Mm.
he's praying, and that scene he's praying in Martini's bar, that became a real prayer for him. And you see the outcome of this, work on that film. The rest of Jimmy's life, he became the man that he played on the screen. Meeting his wife and being married to her for 45 years, and uh, adopting her two sons. And they had two beautiful daughters, and just became this amazing citizen, amazing patriot, amazing dad. And I had a chance to connect with Kelly, Jimmy's daughter,
Mm.
and work with her on writing and crafting the
Yeah,
treatment, the story for this film. And I'm very excited to bring it and share it with audiences.
fantastic. And do you have a aim for a release date or a release year?
Not yet. So we're
Okay.
still in what we call the development phase of
Yeah.
writing the script, and we're in deep talks with financing partners and studios, and
Hmm.
thinking about the fun question of who's going to play Jimmy Stewart and all of those things. So in the first half of the journey of filmmaking at this point, but very excited. We'll let you know as soon as we have more details
Fantastic.
on dates.
That sounds really good. And yeah, finally, quickly, how can we pray for you?
Oh man, that's such a kind question. I'd love your prayers for me to stay faithful, just like Patrick was. And I look at someone who finished well, and that's a goal that I have for me to finish well through in all of the different roles that each of us has as a citizen, as a husband, as a father, as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, as a son and a brother, all those different categories of life, that I would finish well and faithfully through all of those things.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Aaron. Thanks for joining us and talking through everything. And yeah, it was great to speak with you.
Well, thank you, Richard. Appreciate it.